is free country, it's not rent-free country. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode number 79 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about base jumping. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you for joining me today. And before I get into today's main topic, I just have two quick things that I want to say. And the first is that I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Here in Canada, it was just Thanksgiving weekend. I know that Americans celebrate Thanksgiving in November, which makes zero sense to me. And then other countries, I don't know if you do Thanksgiving or not. I don't know if it's a specific North American thing. I think some other countries, other places do celebrate it, but I think primarily it is North America. So anyone who's listening in Canada, I hope that your Thanksgiving weekend was excellent and that you got to spend some time with family, even amid the pandemic and everything that's going on. Hopefully you still had that opportunity. Another thing I wanted to say was that there's been a recent spike in listenership on the show here, and that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Everyone who's listening to the show and tuning in every week for these episodes, I really appreciate it. It's really awesome that people are listening to the things that I have to say, so thank you for that. But then the big thing that I wanted to say today is if you follow my personal account on Instagram, or my wife, if you know us personally and you've been following us, this Thanksgiving weekend, we made the official announcement that we are expecting our first child. And we're very, very excited to be welcoming a child and have a kid. That's so awesome. We're very, very excited. Our baby will be coming in March, so maybe around that time I might be toning down the podcast a little bit if I don't have the time to do it. Maybe I do it every 2 weeks by then. Hopefully I figure out a system so that I can still pay attention to my child, but also still continue the podcast, because I really enjoy doing it, and I'd like to keep it going. Even though there's this large, wonderful change coming to my life, I want to still be able to do the show. Today, though, what I'm talking about is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So last week, I talked about battle scenes in movies, and I had said if anyone has a recommendation for movie reviews to send them on in, and I will look at those recommendations and I will do one, and I got none. No one sent me any, but it's fine. Don't worry about it, because my wife came up with this recommendation. I asked her what movie should I talk about on the podcast this week, and she said Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I was like, you know what? That movie's pretty great, and I've talked about it on the show a little bit before, but why don't I dedicate an entire episode to it? So here I am right now talking about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, this movie was released in 1937, which, if you want to do the math, it's 83 years ago. This movie's 83 years old. Now, if you look on IMDb, it lists 6 directors for this movie, but given everything that I know about it, this is all Walt Disney. He was very involved in the production of this film. He painstakingly looked over every single detail, every frame, every word that was written. He was involved in, because he wanted this to be as perfect as possible. And this movie really, really shows how much work was put into it and how much love was poured into this film, because it's so good. And even 83 years later, I watched it last night. I've got the Blu-ray Signature Collection Edition, and this movie just looks beautiful. It's so good and so dynamic and rich, and I'm going to talk about all of those different things. First though, before I get too deep into it, I'm going to talk about the story and give you a little bit of a rundown. We're going to talk about spoilers. Obviously, this movie is so old, I shouldn't have to worry about spoilers. Even if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you at least have a passing familiarity with the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But anyway, the movie opens with the evil queen. They refer to her as just the queen in the movie, but she's the evil queen, and she's talking to her magic mirror, and she's, magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? And he says that Snow White is the fairest of them all, and the queen is super jealous of Snow White's beauty, so she hires the hunter to kill her, and the hunter is not able to, so Snow White runs off into the woods for safety and stumbles across the cottage of the Seven Dwarfs and then stays with them. It's also important to remember that just before all of this happens, Snow White meets the prince, who also doesn't have a name, he's just the prince, and they fall madly in love after meeting each other just for one instance, but that's fine. It's not a very long movie, so things have to move at a brisk pace. So she's in love with the prince, but she's living in this cottage with the seven dwarves, and they're keeping her safe, and they like her a lot. And then the evil queen finds out where she is, goes to her in a disguise, gives her a poison apple. Snow White bites the poison apple, falls into the sleeping death, and then the dwarves build this glass coffin for her. It's not quite a coffin. There's a word for it. It puts her on display so that they can look at her, because she was so beautiful even in death that they could not bear to bury her. So they put her on display in a glass coffin and kept eternal vigil at her side. And then eventually the prince figures out where she is. He goes to her and kisses her. She wakes up and the movie's over. That's the basic summary of the story of this. I'm going to get more in depth into specific beats and plot points as we go into the review here, but that's the basic arc of what's going on in this movie. First thing I need to talk about when going in depth here is the animation of this movie. Now, this is the very first feature-length animated movie that was ever made. Before then, it was all just animated shorts. The average length of these old shorts is 7 to 8 minutes. If you go on Disney Plus, they have a lot of these old original shorts that you can go watch, like Steamboat Willie or Babes in the Woods is one that I really like. There's a whole lot of really old shorts that you can go watch, and they average about 7 to 8 minutes each. So this movie is an hour and 20 minutes ish, so it's about 80 minutes long, and so way longer, like 10 times longer than anything they've ever made. Way more ambitious, way bigger, and it was just monumental in task. I forgot to look up what the budget was for this movie, but they went way over budget. They spent so much money. And part of the money that they spend in the making of this film is the development of what is called the multi-plane camera. Now, this is a revolutionary technology that completely changed the game in animation and how to make things. So basically, how it works is that you have 3 panes of glass, and the camera is above, shooting downwards at these panes of glass. And you can move the panes of glass up and down to create a feel of depth to your shot. So the background is on the very bottom layer of glass, your midground is in the middle, and your foreground is on the top. And everything that's moving around in the foreground or in the midground, and you can slide things and move them and really create dynamic movement to animated shots that you just couldn't do before. So when watching this movie, really pay attention to some of the complexities of these shots and just have your mind blown by how 83 years ago they were able to get this kind of movement by simply just changing the way that we film animation. This wasn't done before. Or if it was done before, it certainly wasn't done to this scale. As far as I know, though, this was developed for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I did read Walt Disney's biography, and I seem to remember reading that. So the multiplane camera really helps with some of the movement and the feel of everything that's going on. I want to talk specifically about the sequence when Snow White is running into the woods away from the hunter, because he tells her to go. He's a really kind man. He doesn't want to kill the princess, so he sends her into the forest and she runs away. And everything, the foreground, the midground, and the backgrounds are all simultaneously moving at the same time, and the camera is moving, it's zooming in at the same time, and it's got to be a really complicated shot to be able to pull that off, especially with a technology that's so brand new that they're still figuring out how it works. But they were able to execute this like nobody's business. It looks so good. And that whole sequence as a whole, just the way that it's animated, with the tree branches catch on Snow White's skirt, and they turn into look like hands that are grabbing at her, and then they turn back into just plain old branches on the tree. And then she falls into some water, and there are logs that are floating in the water, but the way they move, it looks like they're crocodiles coming to attack her, and she's running away, and everything in the forest is terrifying her, because the way she's perceiving everything, it seems way scarier than it is. And then she sees eyes everywhere, but it turns out that all of these eyes are just rabbits and deers, and there's one turtle that I'm going to talk about later. And there's also owls and squirrels and chipmunks and all these little forest critters who are coming to help her, but the way she sees it, they're just terrifying. So when she finally snaps out of it and comes to, everything is all bright and colorful again. And that's another thing, too. This movie has such vibrant colors. It's so inviting and bright, especially when the dwarves are around. All of their colors, all of their coloring is very vibrant when they're in the mine and digging through and singing their songs. The gems are so sparkly and brightly colored. Everything, it just looks so nice. We have some really iconic animation within this movie as well. The shot of the dwarves walking across on the log on their way home, that's a really iconic shot. Basically, that whole sequence of them singing Hi Ho and heading back home, there's shots of their silhouettes like on the mountain wall, makes them look really huge, and then they come around the corner and they're just these tiny little men. There's just so much beautiful imagery within this movie that I can't recommend it enough. If you haven't seen it, if somehow you have not seen this movie, I don't quite understand how, but if you have not, for whatever reason, please watch it just for the beautiful animation. Not only, though, does this movie look really good, it sounds really good. Now, this movie came out in, what year did I say? 1937? Which means that synced audio in movies had only been a thing for 10 years. So The Jazz Singer was the first talkie to be premiered in theaters, and it came out in 1927. This is 1937. So 10 years later, we get Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And the way this movie sounds, yeah, pay attention to two things when watching this movie: how this movie looks and how this movie sounds, because everything is timed so perfectly. There are musical cues for every movement of the dwarfs. When they are going out to wash their hands and do, and at every like musical beat, another dwarf moves, and all of their footsteps are in time with this music, and it lines up so perfectly. And when all of the critters are walking around and cleaning the dwarf's house, all of their movement is in time with the music, and all of their sound effects helps add to the musical themes as well. So everything is just so thought out and so painstakingly labored over that I can't help but appreciate every aspect of this film. It's just such a labor of love, and you can tell by everything that you see and you hear on the screen. Another thing that they do as like an audio cue is every time they're about to go into a song, all of the characters start speaking in rhyme. And this is something that they do in other Disney movies as well that they've done better since then. I'm thinking specifically of Peter Pan right before the song You Can Fly. There's an entire sequence where they're just talking in rhyme about flying, and it's really, really great. But Peter Pan came out in, I think, 1954, so they've had time to perfect their technique by then. This one, it's a little more rough, but you can definitely tell that it's there and the work has been put in. So all of the rhyming that's going on between the characters' dialogue, it's really, really a really fun way to let the audience know, okay, we're about to go into a song here. I don't have any specific examples that I wrote down, but there's one song where Snow White sings about falling in love with the prince, and she talks about how it was very easy, and all of the dwarves are asking her questions, and their questions are rhyming with each other's questions, which are rhyming with her responses, and you know when you hear dialogue like that in that rhythmic fashion that we're about to go into a song. So that's kind of the things I had to say about the technical aspects about this movie. Definitely the visual and audio cues are wonderful and you should watch them, but why do you care about the movie in general? And why you care about the movie in general is because of the characters, and I have some characters that I wrote down that I want to talk about quickly. First and foremost is Snow White. Now, Snow White, I think she's supposed to be 14. I may be wrong, but I think 14 is how old she's supposed to be, and this is in line with the original Grimm fairy tale story. Now, I didn't really know much about this before, but my wife was saying that there are a lot of people out there who really don't enjoy the way Snow White looks and the way she sounds in her singing. Now, that's all fine and dandy that you don't like that, but you gotta think about this through a different lens. In the time that this movie came out, and also in the time that this story was originally written, this is kind of how Snow White would have looked and would have been perceived as a great beauty because of her appearance. And the way that she sings in the 1930s, this was a very popular, very beautiful type of music. So this is not really a negative towards the film, because you have to look at it why they made these decisions at the time that they made this movie. But Snow White as a character, she's very loving and very caring. She does a lot of work, but also she has a lot of naivete about the world. She doesn't really know things. She knows that she is in love with the prince, but she doesn't really know anything outside of the castle. So when she's going through the forest and she's misinterpreting everything for being malicious around her, this is not really her fault. It's because the evil queen has kept her cooped up because she's jealous of her beauty and doesn't want anyone to see her, and she keeps her in these filthy old rags. And so, because she's just going out into the world kind of really for the first time, we really get to relate with her and realize within ourselves about how little about the world we know as well. And when we go out and we experience things, that's when we learn stuff. It's not when we read a lot of books or do other things. We learn the most from experience. And so her going out really helps her experience things, and she meets the dwarves and she learns a lot from them. Kind of a relatable character in that way. I don't think she's the best character of the movie. I'm gonna get to my favorite character in a bit. The next one I want to talk about, though, is the evil queen. Now, she is just straight up terrifying. Watching this yesterday, her magic mirror is really scary. She is really scary, especially when she transforms herself into the old hag and is going through like the witch's brew in order to make this disguise potion. Everything about it is just creepy, and even the crow that she has in her evil lair, that crow is terrified of her and is like hiding behind skulls or crouching behind a book. Just, it doesn't want to be around her because she is really evil. There's a moment specifically that shows kind of her psychotic evilness when she finishes her transformation. She has her basket of apples and she's made this apple, which, by the way, when she brings the apple out of the cauldron and you see the skull form on it, when the poison is dripping off of the apple and you see like the skull form, that's also really iconic imagery. Not what I'm talking about, though. When she has her basket of apples and she's walking to her boat so that she can go off and find Snow White in the forest, there's a skeleton inside a prison cell, and you can see that he was reaching for like this bucket of water, and that's where he died. He died of starvation, and then his skeleton rot, and he's just a skeleton left. And she looks down at this skeleton, and she kicks the bucket of water towards him, and she's like, "Thirsty? Have a drink!" And then she cackles, and her cackle is just blood-curdling. It's a very well executed cackle. And so I think that her as a villain, her motivations are very surface level. Like, the only reason she wants Snow White out of the way is so that the queen can be the most beautiful in the land. So her motivations that way it's very shallow in that sense. But everything that she does because of her motivation is very compelling and very interesting and very scary. Now, my favorite character in the entire movie is probably also the most iconic of the movie, and that's probably Grumpy. Grumpy is everywhere. Now, my dad also really loves Grumpy. He's got Grumpy like sticker decal on the back of his truck, and he's got Grumpy t-shirts and all these different things. He loves Grumpy. Now, Grumpy actually is the only one in the movie where we see like actually a bit of a character arc. Now I mean of the dwarves, where we see kind of an arc. So we've got Grumpy, Doc, Happy, Sneezy, Bashful, Dopey, and another one. Sneezy? Did I say Sneezy already? There's 7 of them. If I didn't list them all, that's fine. But Grumpy is the only one that has a bit of an arc. He starts off not liking Snow White at all. He doesn't want her around. Her feminine wiles are a big problem. He doesn't want to wash his hands. He doesn't want to be polite at dinner. He doesn't want to do any of that. But by the end of the movie, he like loves Snow White, and he's crying over the fact that she's dead, and he wanted her to kiss his head before he goes off to work in the morning, but he didn't let anyone know that that's what he wanted. But we get specific moments with Grumpy, and I think that's part of why this character has really become really popular in the 83 years that this movie has been released, is because we get these moments with Grumpy that really help us develop him as a character and see him as someone who can change and develop, We also really get a specific mention when Snow White is saying her prayers at night, and this is the only Disney princess that says her evening prayers, by the way, and I really, really liked that. It's a shame that we don't get that anymore, but 83 years ago, kneeling down beside your bed to say your prayers, that was a big thing, and I appreciate that it's in this movie. But she's saying her prayers, and she asks God to let Grumpy like her. And her prayer gets answered because she is able to completely turn around Grumpy's opinion of her. So that's really nice. I like that a lot. Grumpy is just so iconic in everything, and from his looks, from the way he talks, to the way he moves, to the things that he says about the feminine wiles. It's all great. I love Grumpy. He's my favorite character of this movie. A lot of people's favorite characters, though, is probably Dopey. He's the big comic relief of this movie. He swallows a bar of soap. I watched a deleted scene just last night where he also swallows a spoon when he's eating his soup, and they have to get the spoon out of him. That was kind of a fun sequence. But Dopey, he's just running around. He wants extra kisses from Snow White. He doesn't talk. He just runs around. Whenever there's something that nobody else wants to do, they make Dopey do it. He wants a pillow that everyone tries to take from him. He's just there for comic relief, is what he is. And I think a lot of people really like Dopey because of that. Now, let me talk about the turtle. This poor turtle gets walked all over the entire movie. Nothing goes right for him. And I feel really bad for this poor turtle because he's walking up the stairs and it takes him forever. By the time he gets up the stairs, all of the other animals rush down and he gets knocked down the stairs. At least he has a shell to protect himself, and he goes duk, 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 duk. And by the way, that's another moment as well. When the turtle is falling down the stairs, it's really in time with the music. It's like duk, 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 duk. I'm not a musician. I can't really make musical sounds, but that's kind of what it sounds like. But yeah, this poor turtle, he's also kind of comic relief. He doesn't have any lines. None of the animals talk, but he does stuff. He uses his shell as a washboard for washing clothes. He walks around. He hangs out with a little chipmunk, and he's just fun. And it's unfortunate that he gets kind of walked all over in this movie, and it's just because he's a little bit slow. And it's a fine that he's a little bit slow. I'm not too worried about it. I think I'm getting close to the end of my notes here. All I have are negatives. So because I am reviewing this movie, I should talk about a couple of negative things about this that I don't really like as much. Now, for one, this movie's really short. It's an hour and 20 minutes. I would have liked to just have more of it, It's like eating something that is just delicious, but you don't get much of a portion. So it's delicious while you're enjoying it, but then it's over, so you're a little disappointed that you didn't get more of it, So it's kind of a backhanded compliment in that sense, because it's still me saying something positive about this movie is so good, I want more of it. But it is a negative in that sense. Another one is that because this movie came out so long ago, and because audio recording technology was still so new, sometimes it's hard to understand exactly what all of the characters are saying. And like I said, that's only because of the limitations of the technology at the time. Nowadays, it's really easy to get super clean audio. Like even me right here, I'm sitting in my basement in a room with a microphone that I could buy. I'm not a big studio. I don't have really a huge budget, but I'm still able to get good clean audio that people can understand from my own house. And back in the day, that's not something that you could do. So that movie was just limited by the technology of its day. Also, I would have liked a little bit more of Snow White and the Prince together, like maybe give them 2 scenes together before she runs away and goes into the woods. That would be really nice, just to kind of develop their relationship a little bit more and help me buy into it, because they see each other twice in the entire movie. When they first meet, and then when he wakes her up with True Love's kiss, and then they ride off into the sunset. That's the only time they see each other. I would have liked a little bit more from that. And then maybe I would have also liked a scene with the Queen and Snow White together before she was the old hag, before she went off into the forest, just to kind of give their characters a dynamic. Because I know we have the little title sequence at the beginning that talks about the Queen and Snow White, but I would have liked a bit more. And really, that plays into my runtime thing. I'm sure there were other scenes that were deleted that aren't included on my Blu-ray copy that I could have been included in the film, but just weren't. That's pretty much it, though, as far as negatives. Overall, I love this movie. It's so good. After 83 years, it still absolutely holds up, and I highly recommend watching it if you have not seen it already. So I'm going to wrap things up for today, though. So my question for you guys is, have you seen Snow White? Do you like it? Maybe you don't like it. Please let me know. You can reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at PottleNathan, and you can follow the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to subscribe to the show. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places. I've had some trouble with the Google Podcasts recently, though. I'm working on getting that fixed. So if you listen on Google Podcasts and the episodes are coming out late, I don't know exactly why that's happening. I'm working on getting that figured out. Otherwise, though, thank you so much for listening to the show and enjoying it. I really appreciate everyone who listens in. I really like that I'm able to do this and talk to everybody and have people actually listen. So thank you so much for that. And as always, if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.